Good evening. Continuing in the book of Leviticus, we're up to this week's Torah portion, which is called Emor. And last week we finished two Torah portions that we were supposed to have read in the synagogue last week. Acharei Mot, which is after the death of Aaron's two sons, as they were inaugurating the tabernacle in the wilderness, as the Jewish people had come out of Egypt. And then that was followed up with this parsha called Kedoshim, where we learn about many of the ways in which we can elevate ourselves. We can become holy by connecting ourselves to God through these specific guidelines that God tells us, right? So not gossiping, and by having correct judgments, by being truthful, by being honest, by etc. etc. We talked about that last week. So now I'm going to continue in the book of Leviticus, and this week's Torah portion is called Parshat Emor. And the first sentence of this week's Torah portion says, Hashem said to Moses, "Say to the Kohanim are the priests, the sons of Aaron, and tell them." And then we learn a lot about the beginning of this week's Torah portion. We learn a lot about the rules of the priests in the tabernacle and the work they're going to do, which is a little bit repetitive from what we learned before, but it distinguishes the Kohanim, the priests, from the rest of the Jewish people, and how they are supposed to act and what they're supposed to do. And we learn about that in this week's Torah portion. So one of the things that is brought out from the commentators as this language that says that God says to Moses, "Say to the Kohanim and the sons of Aaron," repeats that you say to the Aaron and to his sons. And two things about the language of this particular sentence. One is that the word emor, amar, to say, is a language that speaks of kindness, of love, of God saying to the priest, "You're the people who I am giving the job, the mandate to be the link. When you bless the people, you're going to bless the people with the words that I tell you to use, and you'll be the conduit for the love and the flow of blessing into the world when you bless the Jewish people." And so this language of emor, this language of love, is a really lovely way in which we understand God speaks to Moses to tell Aaron and to his sons. And from this we learn out, this is the source, one of the sources, for the importance of us as a Jewish people, teaching the next generation, teaching our children. So yes, we can teach ourselves, and yes, we can learn something, but it's only as good as you can use it unless you share it. And this week's Torah portion, where it mentions that not only is Moses supposed to speak to Aaron, but he's also supposed to speak to the sons of Aaron. The idea being that we're going to transmit this knowledge, we're going to transmit this wisdom. This wisdom shouldn't stay with Aaron. It should be continually be transmitted. And we all just came out of Passover, and right there we learn everything. We learn so much about how important it is to tell our children, how important it is to teach our children. Not sidebar comment, not only do we teach our children, we also teach ourselves. And we not only teach other people, and we not only teach the next generation who should continue the legacy and continue the wisdom and continue the message that God wants us to put into the world, but we also have to teach it to ourselves. So on the one hand, yes, we're learning and we're growing and we're changing and we're moving as an individual, but we're also given the mandate to then spread that knowledge out, and to spread it to the next generation, and to spread it to people in our midst, to speak about it, to talk about it, to not just hold it inside, and use the speech of Emor, use the speech of Amar, use the speech of love and connection, and not a speech of harshness and direction, but to be one of more loving. So that's how we learn out, just from that one first sentence of this week's Torah portion, the need to spread the knowledge that we have, and to continue to speak it out, but to speak it out kindly and gently and lovingly, and also to speak it out to the next generation. So it teaches us, when we speak it out, we learn ourselves, and we also teach the next generation and teach other people. So that's woven in here. This week's Torah portion, as I mentioned, speaks about the priests, and we have a lot we're going to learn about the priests and what they can do and what they can't do, and what makes them special. So they're considered kadosh, they're considered extra holy, so to speak, because the work that they do is inside the tabernacle, inside the temple in Jerusalem, where the presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence rests. So there's a sort of an extra separateness that the priestly tribe has, because their work is directly in contact with God in the temple. So there's a different role that they play. And it's very interesting because today we know who are descended from Aaron, the high priest. The first Kohen was Aaron. And we know who the descendants of Kohen are. Even till today, we know who those people are. And in America, outside of Israel, the Kohanim, the priestly tribe, the people who are Kohen, they get the first aliyah in synagogues. They get called up to the Torah first. And on holidays and in Israel every single day, they go up onto the bima, they go up in the synagogue and they bless the people in the congregation, and they bless them with the priestly blessing of peace and divine grace shining upon us, and they are the conduit for love and peace and connection and bringing blessing into the world and bringing it into the Jewish people. So they have to be on a different level. They have to think about that. They have to somehow embody the role that they've been given. This is the job you have. Remember where we talked last week about the Parsha? It's called Achrei Mot, after the death of Aaron's two sons. So Aaron was inaugurating the temple. He was doing the service, and then he learns that his two sons die as they bring in this foreign fire that they would not ask to bring, and they die. And Aaron is told, don't mourn. You have to keep doing your job. You have to keep bringing divine presence down into the world. You have to keep doing the avoda. You have to keep bringing the sacrifices. You have to keep doing this. Yes, your sons died, but your job right now, the job that you were mandated with, you were charged with, was to do this work, was to bring heaven down to earth. Bring heaven down to earth. So you can't leave what you're doing. You have to stay focused. And it's a very hard for us to understand that. How to compartmentalize. All right, there's this emotional response to the death of my sons. Putting myself in Aaron's place, death of my two sons, and I also have this work to do, which is so important. Like, it's more important perhaps than mourning right now, because this is what I have to do, and it has to happen now, and that's what I'm doing. So there's a lesson there, I think, in focusing. Like, the focus right now is to do this, right, and not to get caught up in the emotion and the emotional response, and what happened to his two sons is beyond anybody's ability to understand, how to endure the death of two children at once in this very joyous time. And I have to do this work. I have to continue to bring heaven down onto earth. And so the role of the Kohen, the role of the priest, is to connect heaven and earth, God to the people, God to earth. So one of the things that we learn in this week's Torah portion that the Kohen cannot do is come into contact with death. So it says here, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person among his people, except for the relative who is closest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and to his brother, his virgin sister who is close to him, who has not been wed to a man, to her shall he contaminate himself. So what we're learning is that the Kohen should not come in contact with death. And how we practice that today is that a Kohen cannot go into a cemetery. And then there's other applications to that, like if there's a Kohen who's training to be a doctor, and what that looks like in a hospital, etc., or what it looks like to get on an aeroplane where there were dead people who were being flown to another country. Like, there's other things that the Kohen has to take into account that we don't even think about. But the idea, I want to bring out the idea of why it is that a Kohen can't come into contact with death is because death, if you go back to the Adam and Eve story, Adam and Eve ate from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, and when they ate from that tree and they took in that knowledge, so to speak, and they took in a certain energy, such that death was the result. The consequence of what they did is that there would be death. There would be an uncoupling of the soul, the divine heavenly soul that is all inside of us, that we are vessels for this heavenly soul, that is our neshama, that's our soul, and we're also a physical body. And death is an uncoupling of that body and soul. And the soul continues to live. The soul doesn't die. Like we say death, but it really isn't the end. The soul continues to live. So, but it's separated from the body, right? So there's a vacuum, there's a void, there's something we call tame, something we call a spiritual energy, that when a person comes into contact with that spiritual energy, tame, then they can't go into the temple. So the Kohen can't come in contact with death. Death is an uncoupling of divine energy our soul from our physical body. It's an uncoupling of heaven and earth. It's an uncoupling of heaven and earth. And the role of the Kohen is to bring heaven and earth together. So they can't come into contact with something that's caused a disconnection between that heaven and earth, between that physical and spiritual. They have to be the one to bring it all together, all together, all together. So they enter into a state of tameh, should they come in. We all do come into contact with tameh, but if the Kohen is charged with the job of being the one to connect it, and the one to be in the temple, and the one to be bringing earth, heavenly energy down, godly energy down, then he can't come in contact with death. The other well-known in those circles for Kohanim thing that's mentioned in this week's Torah portion is that a Kohen cannot marry a divorced woman, which is an interesting thing. And one of the things I learned about that I think is interesting to pull out is that when a couple come together, we have an understanding that there's holiness there. There's a divine presence that rests between the couple when they get married, and when they get divorced, that heavenly presence leaves. There's something that's created between in the friction and in the discord that happens between the couple, that the heavenly energy that connected them leaves, and you're left with two individual entities that go off, and there's certain different directions, and maybe there's animosity and maybe there isn't, but the point is that the heavenly part of that union has separated. So again, it's this idea of pulling the heaven out of the earth, is pulling the spiritual out of the physical, and when that happens, it leaves a vacuum, and that vacuum is on some level a negative vacuum, and that's not something that the Kohen can come in touch with, because his whole his whole purpose is to bring it all together, and to bring it to a place of love and peace and connection and unity of heaven and earth. So when it's separate, then there's a disunity. The Kohen can't be there and can't go there. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. So that's just what I wanted to say about that. The Kohen is charged with bringing connection, bringing divine energy down, bringing life and bringing peace. And it can't be about, he can't be charged with the job of separation, of the separateness caused by divorce, the separateness caused by death. So he has to see the completeness with God. That's his job, is to bring completeness and togetherness. So death and divorce and all things that bring tameh into the world are things he has to stay away from. Okay, so this is the story of the Kohen. Also, we understand and we learn in this week's Torah portion that if the sacrifice, if the offering that the Kohen is bringing in on the altar is blemished in any way, then that offering is disqualified. We can't use that offering. We also learn that if the Kohen has a blemish, he also can't be serve in the holy temple, which is interesting because, on some level, some of these blemishes, some of the things that would disqualify this Kohen from being able to serve in the temple are things that are outside of his control. Maybe he's born with a limp, so he can't be serving in the temple, which is also interesting. Like, he has to accept that. There has to be a level of acceptance that God is in control. And if this Kohen with this blemish, so to speak, disqualifies him from serving in the temple, then he has to go with that. He has to understand that. He has to accept that. He can't rail against that and do it anyway. That's the way it's set up, and he has to not serve in the temple. And here's what I want to bring in. On many times in our Jewish tradition, we have distinctions between people. We have distinctions between time. We have distinctions between places. There's there's this idea of unity and everything should come together and be unified, and there's also diversity and there's also difference. And if you think about that, here the Kohen, the priestly nation are different from the rest of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are different than the rest of the humanity. There's differences. There's a different role that Jewish people play. There's a different role that the Kohanim play. There's a different role that non-Jewish people play. That's kind of built into our system of understanding how God has set up the world. We also understand there's a difference between night and day. There's a difference between spirituality and physicality. There's a difference between a weekday and a Shabbat. There's a difference between Shabbat and the holidays, the holy days, the holidays. There's a difference between that. And that's, again, what we learn about in this week's Torah portion. We learn about the holidays it's again another whole chapter which delineates all the Jewish holidays that are to be celebrated, and we go through and we learn about those holidays, and we read it on every holiday that comes up. We read it in the synagogue. We read about the holidays. So I'm going to go through very quickly some of the holidays. Before I do that, I want to point out this idea of separation, this idea of distinctiveness and difference, and again, I don't want it to be better or worse, different, right? Yes, we want unity, and yes, we want everything to recognize the oneness of the world, and there's nothing other than God, and yes, and different people, like men are different than women, and older people are different than younger people, and children are different than parents, and we have many different ways, and very holy people and people who are very learned in Torah have a different status in our society than people who are still learning and coming up, so people who are very humble have a different energy they put into the world. So we do recognize differences and distinctiveness and separations between people, but that the ideal is unity. The ideal is love and connection, but not by making everything the same. We're saying, yes, there's differences. The difference between day and night. There's difference between Shabbat and the weekdays. And again, in this week's Torah portion, we're going to go through. But the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people when they came out of Egypt, the first mitzvah that was given to them was to observe and to recognize the new moon, was to declare the new moon. This was God saying, you people get to declare when the moon is new. And based on that comes all the holidays. When the holidays fall out is on some level something that we are charged with deciding when is that new moon, and therefore when are the holidays. And in this week's Torah portion we learn about on this day is this holiday, on this day is this holiday, but the month we declare the month by looking at the moon. So we have some agency over time. We have some involvement with time. The Shabbat, which comes around every 7 days, is God-given, right? So we've learnt in Genesis how God created the world, and we went through 6 days of creation, 6 days of a chol of weekday, and then we have the Shabbat day, the separate day. It's a holy day. It's a day where we stop creating, where we say God creates the world, and we take a step back and we reevaluate and we reconvene and we count our blessings and we think about who we are, and we think about perhaps more spiritual things and what God means to us, and we have a relationship with Shabbat that is different than the other days. We have a relationship with God on Shabbat that's different than the other days. It's a time to be with God. Similarly, all the Jewish holidays are those days to be with God. They're a moadim. They're meeting times. They're times where we separate off from our weekday jobs, work, activities, creations, all the things that we do during the week, and we declare these days different. But God tells us what the energy of that time is. So for a Jew, we have a lot of different ways of calculating time, but on some level, I've heard this, and I like this idea that time could seem to be linear, like we started here and we're going through time and we keep going and we're on a line. Or it could be like we come around every year. We come around to the same. Okay, so now it's May, whatever it is, May 5th. So it's coming around every day, every year. It's May 5th. Fine. But that's circular, and one's linear and one's circular. And I heard, and I like this, I think it's Kabbalistic, that Jewish time is like, what was the word, if I can find it? I really liked it. It's called an ascending spiral. It's an ascending, like a circular helix, like it goes around, but it's going up at the same time. So yes, it's going around, and yes, we come around to the same time every year, but we're also going up, meaning that we're progressing, hopefully, that we're getting closer, like we're bringing the world up, like there's a movement towards something, but it's also circular. We're coming around. What are we coming around to? We're coming around to a certain energy. There's a certain energy that exists in the world, because this is the way God set up the world, that exists in the springtime. It's a different energy in the springtime than in the fall time. Different energy. And we have a little bit of a confusing muddle of things. Let's take the springtime. So we have a holiday, Passover, in the springtime, and it has to be in the springtime. But it might be interesting to think, well, yes, it's a historical event of when the Jews came out of Egypt, and it's a return to the energy that exists in this time of redemption, of being freed, of coming out of something that holds us back, of being able to kind of break out and be redeemed. So that energy that exists in the month of Nisan, which is, we're not in that month anymore, but that energy that exists in the month of Nisan happens every Nisan. And that's why the exodus from Egypt had to happen in Nisan, because the energy of redemption and coming out of a constrained place is greater in this time. And that's why the redemption from Egypt had to happen in the springtime. It had to happen in the month of Nisan. It has to happen that spring is, if you look around in the physical world, I don't know where everybody's living, but where I live in Providence, Rhode Island, you can look around and you see nature bursting out. You see things growing. You see things moving. You see things coming out from the hidden buds. The blossoms are coming out. It's so beautiful, and perhaps there's a way of thinking about, like, take it into a God realm and say what's happening is there's a breaking out in the physical world, there's a breaking out in the spiritual world, there's a breaking out. What am I breaking out from? And where did we come from? We came from Mitzrayim, we came from Egypt, we came from a place of constraint. And we were in such a low place. When the Jewish people were in Egypt, we were in such a low place. We were like at the end mark, the 49th level of impurity. We were way down. We're not doing what we're supposed to do. We were doing some things, but we weren't doing what we were supposed to do. And we lost touch with God, and we didn't know how to redeem ourselves. God pulls us out. He puts us in the desert. And now we're building up. We came from nothing. We were at the bottom. We were like hit rock bottom. And now we're building ourselves back up. And this is a period between Passover and the next holiday coming up called Shavuot, where the Jewish people receive the Torah on Mount Sinai. But this period from coming out of Egypt until receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai is 49 days, 50 days, but 49 days. 49 levels of impurity that we descended into in Egypt. And now we're going 49 days until we get to Sinai. And are we ready? Are we different? Are we the vessels to receive the divine light? How do we get from there to there? We worked on ourselves. And so too, in this period now, right now, but we just came out of Passover, we're in between that. We're in that in-between place. Yesterday I think was day 25, of counting the days from the second day of Passover until we get to Shavuot. It's 49 days. And day by day, by day, by day, we're going to work on ourselves. We're trying to work on ourselves. We're trying to be better. We're trying to improve ourselves. We're trying to understand the energies that exist inside of us. We say there are 7 energies. I'm not going to go into all of the different Kabbalistic understandings of the different energies. I think that would be a great class to do. But there are 7 energies that we have, and kindness, and I'm not going to go through them all, strictness, etc. And each one manifests itself in each day. So each day we're going to work on and acknowledge and try to focus on one of those 7 energies compared to another one of those 7 energies. So we do that for 49 days, and hopefully by the end of that we're different than we were before, right? So our Jewish tradition, again, built in to our system, are opportunities for us to acknowledge the fact that we can always start anew, that we can always change, that we can always work on ourselves, that we always pray, that we are a work in progress. We are people who continue to birth ourselves as we grow, as we become mature through our lifetimes, and even in our 60s and 70s and 80s, we're still birthing ourselves. We're still growing. We're not done. We don't accept that you're done. We don't accept that you can't change. That's not the Jewish approach to who we are. We have built in these times where we focus on what growth and what, not that we don't do that every day, but that when we talked last week, we talked about forgiveness and how forgiveness is built into the system so that we can wash ourselves clean. On Yom Kippur, we can wash ourselves clean, start again. During the 49 days of counting the Omer, we can work on ourselves. We came from nothing and we're building ourselves up into something. We're going from nothing to something. Now that's reminiscent of what we understand God did. God created nothing, and then out of nothing he created the universe. He created something. So God created the nothing, and then he creates the something. We are given something. We take ourselves, or we experience a rock bottom, a humility, a bottom level, a sense of, and we need that. We need to not fill ourselves up with our own ego. We need to go down onto the bedrock, which we did over Passover when we ate matzah, which is that leavened bread that's down and humble and not puffed up with our own ego. We try to get to that place of, humility, and then we're going to build ourselves up, not to be arrogant by the time we get to Shavuot, but to recognize that we have things to work on, and try to work on them, and ask God to help us, and then get to the place where we're better, we're improved, we're a little bit more along the line than we were before. And so in this week's Torah portion, we are given the commandment to count those 49 days. I'm not sure if I can find it. Here. So Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you shall enter the land that I give you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring an omer, which is an offering. It's a barley offering. Your first harvest to the Kohen." So when you first come into Israel, this is what you're going to do. You're going to bring an omer. And you shall wave the omer before Hashem to gain favor for you. On the morrow of the rest day, the Kohen shall wave it. And you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day. So after the first day of Passover, so the second day, you're going to start counting. From the morrow of the rest day, it says right here in the Torah, from the day when you bring the omer of the offering, 7 weeks. They shall be complete. Until the morrow of the 7th week, you shall count 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering to Hashem. And that 50th day is the holiday of Shavuos. So it told in the Torah, from that day when you bring the Omer offering, when you enter into the land of Israel, and you bring the barley offering. What's the barley offering? The barley offering is an animal offering. It's an animal. I was an animal. I have this animal side of me. I love to eat, and I love to drink, and I love to be engaged in my body. Yes, and I'm a soul, and I want to access my soul. I want to bring my soul out. I want my body to be the horse, and I want my soul to be the rider. I want the soul to lead me. I want to understand what my soul is saying to me, and I want to follow my soul. I want the horse to be led by the rider. I want the horse, i.e. the body, to be led by the soul, i.e. the rider. That's what I wanted to go. So the Omer offering is the barley offering, is the animal. I want to get rid of the animal side of me, not rid of it. I want to channel it. I want to channel my animal side, because I respect my animal side. I take care of my animal side. I have to look after it. I can't overeat, and I can't overindulge, and I can't eat bad foods, and I have a responsibility to take care of my body. I can't kill myself. I can't put tattoos on my body. We've read some of those things last week. So I have to take care of my body. I have to look after it. It's a mitzvah to take care of yourself, and to look after yourself, and respect yourself, and not speak ill of yourself. And I also want to elevate my spiritual side. So as we go through the 49 days till we get to the 50th day, that's what we're working on. We're working on improving ourselves and working on ourselves. And how do I do that? And so, that's a class for another time, to go through the 7 times 7 till we get to the 50. But in that is this nugget of time, managing time. How do we manage time? How do we think about time? How do we process time and what's our time awareness? And so, as I said, we have the sun cycle. So that takes us 6 days. 7 days is Shabbat. We have 6 days of work. 7 days is Shabbat. And then we have the moon cycle that we're in charge of declaring the Rosh Chodesh, and we're starting a new Chodesh. We're starting new. We get to start again, and we get to decide when the moon is. We're partners in that, and then when the holidays fall out, and there's lots of 7 days, like on the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei. So Nisan is the first month, is the month we came out of Egypt. The other side, the other end of the if it's circular time spiral, the opposite end of that is the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei, which is the month that we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the holiday of Sukkot. So Sukkot happens at the other end of the month of the calendar. So we have in the beginning we have spring and Passover, and yes, it's the historical God, the God who brought the Jews out of Egypt, and yes, we're doing that. But we're also acknowledging and really focusing on the fact that there's redemptive energy in the in not just in the air, that's too available for us to harness. Like it's greater. There's a greater redemptive energy here for us to hold onto, to grab, to use, to improve ourselves, to work on ourselves. It's an amazing concept. And when we get to Sukkot, which is the harvest festival, okay, so it's the other side of the calendar. We get to that holiday. What do we do on that holiday? We sit in Sukkot. We sit in these booths. We go outside of our houses. We build a little structure made out of whatever, and it has on the roof. It has leaves and trees and bamboos and whatever you have. But it's not our solid. I'm good. I'm in control. I have my home. I'm good. It's going out into the elements. It's going out if it rains, if it's hot, whatever it is. There's an aspect that we go out into that sukkah and we so to speak live with God. And the idea of the sukkah, Kabbalistically, is it represents the clouds of glory that sustained the Jewish people, that protected the Jewish people when they were wandering in the desert. As we mentioned, the Jewish people come out of Egypt, they get put in the desert, and they wander in the desert for 40 years and 40 years, and that as they're traveling around, they're protected by the clouds, these clouds of glory that represent the protection of God, looking after the Jewish people, getting rid of wild animals and scorpions and things. We're going to learn about that a little bit later, where that breaks down. But that's the cushion that God provides for us. It's almost like I like to think of it as sort of almost like Aladdin on his magic carpet, that we're sort of like we're safe, we're taken care of. God is taking care of us and leading us somewhere, taking us somewhere, like teaching us how to walk on our own. We start off almost like little children, and we're just following God into the desert. The month of Nisan, which we just left behind, that's one before where we are now, is depicted by the zodiac sign of sheep. And we were like sheep. We came out of Egypt and we just followed Moses. We followed Nachshon and Aminadab as he jumped into the Reed Sea, which split. And we followed. There was a sort of a herd, kind of like flock kind of experience that we had. We were like the sheep. That is the zodiac sign for Nisan. Like this is not accidental. This is all fits together. It's crazy stuff. So we come into the desert. And now we're learning how to walk. We're learning how to be independent. We're learning what God wants of us and how to live our lives. And we're learning and we're growing. And this month we're in now, month of ER, this is the month we're in now, is a month depicted zodiac sign of a bull, which is learning how to be independent and stand for itself and become a little bit of a leader and be strong and be and to stand on their own 2 feet. And that's what we also have to do. Yes, there might be times where we're more of a herd and we follow along, and then there's times where we're going to be like the bull, like the ox, and we're going to be strong and we're going to pull others along and we're going to be independent and we're going to have a certain confidence of who we are. And then the next month that we're going to head into, that the month of Shevat, called Sivan. And the month of Sivan is depicted in the zodiac signs by the twins.